Hello everyone and welcome to PeopleSoft interview series by PeopleSoft channel. In this series, we are going to discuss the PeopleSoft interview questions along with their answers. We will also discuss the possible follow-up questions and whenever required, we will cover a quick PeopleSoft tutorial while answering the questions. In today's episode, we are going to discuss interview questions around PeopleSoft records. So, without further delay, let's start with the interview questions. First question is, what are the different types of records available in PeopleSoft? So there are 7 types of records which are available in PeopleSoft. These are SQL table, SQL view, derived or work record, dynamic view, sub record, query view, and temporary table. We can check this in application designer. So if we create a new record and if we go to record type, from here we can see that there are 7 types of records which are available in PeopleSoft. A follow-up question is, which of these records are physical records? That means which of these records can be built in the application designer. So out of the 7 records, there are 4 records which we can build. Those are SQL table, SQL view, query view, and temporary table. And the remaining 3 records are those records which we cannot build. So these remaining 3 records which we cannot build are derived record, dynamic view, and sub record. So this is the option which we can use in order to build the current record. So on doing this option, we have to select the table space. We will select the option as create table and we will execute the script. Once we complete the table build procedure, we can see that now the table is available in the database. That means the table is now a physical table. So we can see that for a SQL table, build option is available. For SQL view, build option is available. It is also available for query view and temporary table. On the other hand, we can see that for dynamic view, the build option is not available. For derived or work record, the build option is not available. Also for sub record, it is not available. So again, a follow-up question can be that why we cannot build the remaining 3 records. To answer this question, we need to understand the nature of the record and also the purpose for which the record is created at the first place. For dynamic view, we have the option to use the SQL editor and write a SQL in order to generate a table structure. However, how it is different from a traditional SQL view is, as the name suggests dynamic view, it is dynamic in nature, which means using PeopleSoft people code, we can change the structure of the table dynamically. As the structure of the table can be changed at runtime, that is the reason we cannot have a physical table for dynamic view. Because in SQL view, it's a physical table. So whenever we make changes to the SQL view, we have to build the record. And that is how dynamic record or dynamic view is different from a SQL view. Coming to derived or work record. So the purpose of derived record is to hold temporary values while user is making a transaction. And the purpose is not to store the values of the transaction like a traditional SQL table. For example, let us say user is ordering 5 items. Each item will have their own prices and we have to display a total amount as a total amount in cart to the user. Now, the requirement is that we do not want to store the total into database. We just want to display the total to the user at runtime. So in that case, we can create a derived record and we can add a field called total and we can write people code in order to calculate the total for all the items which user has added to his cart, and finally we can display the total on the PeopleSoft page. In this case, we are not storing the total into database, we are just displaying it to the user. So this is the reason that derived records cannot be built, as they are used to just hold the temporary values. Coming to subrecord, so subrecord is not a table, it is just a collection of fields which you can combine together and use in different records. For example, if we talk about the address of an employee, then we can have fields such as area, city, pin, state, country, etc. So what we can do is, instead of adding these 5 fields in the required records each time, we can create a sub record of these 5 fields, and whenever we want to use these 5 fields into a new record, then we will add this sub records. So it is just a logical grouping of one or more fields. That is the reason it cannot be built in PeopleSoft system. Second question is, what is the difference between a SQL table and SQL view in PeopleSoft? So we can see some differences in SQL table and SQL view, such as what is the purpose for which a record is used. For example, SQL table is used to store the transactional data, which can be used by many different applications. On the other hand, SQL views are used to display data at runtime based upon certain criteria. For SQL view, we write SQL in order to generate the data at runtime. For example, this is one of the SQL view. Now, when we will open the page, then at runtime, this SQL will be triggered, and this SQL will generate data for this SQL view at runtime. Then the difference lies in where each of these records can be used. As we discussed, SQL table is primarily used to store the transactional data in database, which can be used by many different applications. It is also used to manipulate the data, and we also use SQL table to create staging tables. So in staging table, we can load the data, we can do the data manipulation as per business logic, and finally we can create the transform data. These are the operations where SQL table is used. On the other hand, SQL view are often used to create prompt table in PeopleSoft. Coming to one more difference between SQL table and SQL view is that we have something called as state record in application engine. So we can use SQL table as a state record in application engine. On the other hand, we cannot use SQL view as a state record. Let us say we have these two records. The first one is PC underscore RPO underscore view underscore AET, which is a SQL view, as we can see. And the second record is PO underscore header underscore AET, which is a SQL table. So if we create a new application engine, and if we go to state record for this application engine, if we are trying to add a view as a state record, then we can see that we cannot find this record because SQL views cannot be used as a state record in application engine. On the other hand, if we try to add the SQL table, then we can see that we can use a SQL table as a application engine table or state record in application engine. So these are the differences between a SQL table and a SQL view. A follow-up question is, can we perform data manipulation operations on SQL view such as insert, update, delete, etc.? So we cannot perform the data manipulation operations on SQL view like how we do on a SQL table. This is because the primary purpose of SQL view is just to gather data from different sources at runtime and display it to the user. The primary purpose is not to store the data like a SQL table. Next question is, what is subrecord in PeopleSoft? So subrecord represents a collection or group of one or more fields which can be used together, and we can use these subrecord in multiple different records. Let us see an example. Suppose we have these four fields which represents the address of an employee. These are street, city, zip code and country. Now we need to use these four fields into two different records which are employee address 1 and employee address 2. So one solution is to go to each record, add these four fields and build the record. But imagine a scenario where we want to use these four fields in multiple different records. In that case, instead of adding these four fields into each record, we have a better approach. And that approach is to use a subrecord. So we created a new record to which we added these four fields and we selected the data type as subrecord. Now let us say we want to use these four fields into employee address 2 table. So as we have created subrecord, we will go to this employee address 2 and we will insert this subrecord. We will give the subrecord name and we will insert the subrecord. As you can see now, the subrecord has been inserted into this table. Then we will go ahead with building process. So if we check the table in our database, then we can see that we have this required address field available because of the subrecord. Then a follow-up question is, can subrecord be built in PeopleSoft? So the answer is no, we cannot build subrecords in PeopleSoft because it is not a physical table. It is just a collection of one or more fields which we can reuse in multiple places. Another follow-up question is that if we change the structure of the subrecord which is currently being used in multiple places, then what will be the impact of this change? So let us see an example. Suppose we have created this employee address subrecord with these four fields and we are using this subrecord in two other SQL records which are employee address 1 and employee address 2. Now we have a requirement that in this subrecord we have to add one more field called phone. So if we add this to this subrecord and if we click on save, now if we check the structure of these two records, which is employee address 1 and employee address 2, we can see that both of them are still showing the old structure. You can see the employee address 1 table, phone field is not there, and if we check the employee address 2 table, phone field is not there. Now since we have made changes to the structure of this employee address 1 table, we need to build the record. So we will build the record, we will select alter table option and we will continue the build process. And now if we check the employee address 1 table, now we will have the phone field. So this is the impact of changing the structure of the subrecord. So whenever you are making changes to the subrecord, you need to first do the impact analysis. That means you need to understand what will be the impact of this change to the subrecord, and then you need to rebuild all those target tables in which you are using the subrecord. The next question is, what are temporary tables in PeopleSoft? So temporary table is one of the PeopleSoft record which is used for parallel processing in application engine. Let us quickly understand the concept of parallel processing. Suppose in this example, we have a requirement that we want to create an application engine for bulk data processing. That means the data size will be huge and the flow is like this. The application engine first has to receive the data into some SQL table. Then based upon the business logic, it will execute couple of SQL statements or people code commands onto that data, and finally it will insert the transform data into the main data tables. Now imagine that this application engine is processing bulk data. For example, let's say 100,000 rows of data it is processing, and it is observed that it is taking 5 hours to process these data. Now, there are some problems here. First, it is not feasible to run one application engine for 5 hours because it might create deadlock issues in the system. That is first. And another point is when such an application engine is running for too long, then some functionality may not be available to the user. For example, in some organization, by the end of the day, we by the end of the day, the developers have scheduled the application engine to pay the vouchers which were created on that day, and during that process, the functional users are not allowed to create the new vouchers. So if the similar case is applicable here, then it might create problems as the system may not be available for 5 hours. So how can we solve this problem? So we can solve this problem using the concept of parallel processing. Let us understand the concept. In parallel processing, instead of having just one instance of application engine, in this case, we have created 5 instances of the same application engine, and each one is having its own instance ID. And for each instance, we have assigned a dedicated table. This will be the temporary table. As you can see, each of this application engine has each of its separate temporary table, and we will write a business logic to divide this 100,000 rows of data across all these 5 tables. As you can see, we have divided the 100,000 rows of data into 5 chunks of 20,000 rows of data. Now, earlier to process 100,000 rows of data, it was taking 5 hours, but due to this splitting of data, since all these application engine are now running simultaneously with the data split across multiple instances, each of them can be completed with approximately 1 hour, and finally they will insert the transform data into the main table. So this is how we use the temporary tables in parallel processing, and using parallel processing, we gradually decrease the time taken to process from 5 hours to 1 hour. So this is how temporary tables are used in parallel processing. A follow-up question is how temporary tables are different from a SQL table. So we have to understand that SQL table are used to store the transactional data. So for example, if we have purchase orders, then we will store the actual transactional data of the purchase order across its multiple tables. For example, PO header, PO line, PO ship, PO distrib, etc. And that data will remain in the system forever, and user can control the data. On the other hand, the purpose of temporary tables is not to store any kind of transactional data. As the name suggests, temporary. The purpose of temporary tables is to hold the data for processing during an application engine process, and once the application engine has been processed successfully, we can delete or ignore that data into temporary tables. So this is how SQL table is different from a temporary table. Another follow-up question is how many instances of temporary tables can be created for one application engine in parallel processing. So PeopleSoft system allows us to create up to 99 instances of a temporary table for parallel processing. The next question is what are 3 different types of tables available in PeopleSoft database? So in PeopleSoft database, we have these 3 types of tables available, which are system catalog tables, people tools metadata table, and application tables. A follow-up question is explain each type of table along with some examples. So let us understand the same. So the first one is system catalog tables. As the name suggests, it is like a catalog of tables, and it contains the information about all the tables which are available into the PeopleSoft system. And these system catalog tables stores the metadata about your PeopleSoft tables. Let us see an example. So in our PeopleSoft system, we are using Oracle SQL Developer as a database for PeopleSoft system. And in Oracle SQL Developer, we have user underscore tables as one of the system catalog table. So one quick note here is that if you are using some other database system like IBM DB2 or Microsoft SQL Server, then the name of the system catalog tables will be different in that case. It won't be user underscore tables. So if we query these tables, then we can see that we are getting the information about all the tables which are available in the system, and there are some technical details like table space name. Then we have a couple of technical columns which indicates the table status. Then we have information whether a table lock is enabled or when was the table last analyzed, etc. So we can use this table to find information about a specific table. For example, let us say if we want to check the PSPO header table, in that case, we can write a query like this and we can get the information about a table we are looking for. Moving to the second type of table, which is PeopleTools metadata table. So these are the tables which contains the metadata, means data about your PeopleSoft objects. These can be your PeopleSoft objects such as record, fields, messages, sequels, people code, component, pages, etc. So let us see one example. So suppose if we want to know the information or the structure about the PeopleSoft records, then we have one of these PeopleTools metadata table called PSRec definition. And if we query this table, we can see that we have the data about this record, such as what is the field count, what is the version, what is the description for this record. Then we have a couple of more fields which describe the table. All right. For example, if we in the same table we query for a PSPO header table, then we can see the information about this table, such as it has total 87 fields, it has 12 fields which are working as indexes. This is the description for this record, and we have many other metadata about this table. So, as a developer, if we want to check or if we want to know the information about a particular record in PeopleSoft, we can use these PeopleSoft metadata tables to get the required information. Third type of tables are called application tables. So these are the tables which are created by the developers, and these are used to store the transactional data in PeopleSoft system. For example, we talked about the PSPO header. So PSPO header or PO header is an application table which is created by the PeopleSoft developer, and it stores the transactional data with respect to the purchase order. So as a PeopleSoft developer, we will be working a lot with the application tables, and we will be creating the new application table as per the business requirement. Alright guys, that's it for today's episode. If you found the content helpful, then please like the video. We are releasing the second part of this episode on 5th of September. So if you are interested in the same, then please subscribe to the channel. Thank you.